No, this is not yet another typical discussion about IoT security and how a hacker attacked a casino, leveraging access to a smart fish tank connected to the enterprise network. True story, by the way. This is different here. We all get this part of the problem. And the good news is that governments have started regulating IoT system security. But are you aware of the many laws and standards that are coming up or already in place? Do you realize the differences from one country to another one? Do you understand the implications for your ongoing or future IoT project? So while this is yet another complex domain, there are solutions to help you navigate all of that. Kevin Hilscher from DigiCert joins me on the IoT Show to discuss these new regulations, what you need to do to be compliant, and how DigiCert can help with all of that. Hi everyone, this is the IoT Show. I'm Olivier, your host. Today we have Kevin with us to discuss security in the realm of IoT and more specifically, what DigiCert has to offer to help you secure your IoT devices. Kevin, how are you?
I'm doing great. How are you, Olivier?
I'm great. That was a mouthful of a title or introduction, right? Was it?
It is. It is. IoT security. There's lots to talk about, and it's always a mouthful.
Yeah, it is. It is. One thing we'll not do today is do the usual security for IoT speech, right? It's important as well. People get it. They understand it. Now they need to understand how they can do it, right? So we'll have a little discussion about some of the whys, discuss some of the regulations that are out there. You list that for us, and then we'll discuss the how and the best practices you recommend. But before we get into all of that, who's Kevin? What are you doing?
Yeah. Who is Kevin? Ask myself that frequently. But today, Kevin is a product manager here at DigiCert. So I run the Device Trust product team. And so we have several in-market products today that help connected product builders or OEMs building connected products secure their devices. And so we have an SDK that goes on the device. We have a cloud platform, and we're building some new products that we're shipping this year. And so my good team's goal is to really help OEMs build secure connected products. And Olivier, you and I both come from the Microsoft days. We both worked in Azure IoT, so we saw all sorts of crazy business with symmetric keys and username passwords on devices. And so the time I spent at Microsoft, it really built a passion in me to kind of help OEMs really do security well on their devices. And so that I've kind of dedicated my career around that. And our group at DigiCert is solely focused on that.
That's you. I was about to say you're landing in the right place. Like with the interactions we had when you were at Microsoft and all the work you were doing with customers, directly with customers, that was one of the aspects you're not talking enough, I think, which is how much you were involved with actual implementation of IoT solutions with customers, guiding them, helping them with the architecture, the technology choices, and so on. So suffice to say, you know what you're talking about, and this is great. So let's talk about the whys. So there have been recent, and well, it's not new, but recent particular, regulations have been put in place to enforce security among IoT technologies and solutions out there, right? So until now, everything was very much related to, the internet or general applications, whatever. But there's some regulations that are really specific and that apply to the IoT space more than any other ones, right? Can you tell us a bit more about what that landscape looks like?
Oh, and the landscape is really changing. So what you see in front of you is a slide that kind of shows that globally there's basically a huge up-leveling of IoT security in terms of regulations. And as a connected product builder or an OEM building connected washers, dryers, medical devices, you name it, and if you're selling globally and you're not aware of these standards, that's going to be a big problem in the future because there's a lot of fines and penalties associated with a lot of these regulations now. And if we were to take a quick tour around the globe here, you can see in the US, we have a number of regulations that are in flight or in place today. Even at the state level in California and Oregon, if your device is compromised and causes financial, damages, the liability now falls on the OEM or the connected product builder. We see the FDA just this past fall for medical device builders put out some significant FDA pre-market guidance submissions. It's a fairly lengthy document that talks about all the things that medical devices and OEMs building medical devices need to do to properly secure their devices. And it runs the gamut from crypto to secure development practices. And then Cyber Trust Mark, that's an interesting one. So that is a new cybersecurity labeling scheme. So think about it as an Energy Star label for IoT devices. So soon you'll be able to go to Best Buy and other stores and pick up a consumer device, and it may have this label on it. And it's a voluntary program, but if you are a consumer device builder and you want that label, there's a bunch of things you need to do. And really, this came out of the Biden administration and their desire to up-level consumer, cybersecurity posture and device security. And then if we go over to the EU, I mean, we see a ton of things going on in the EU. What's really hot this year in the EU is this EU Cyber Resiliency Act, or Resilience Act, CRA. It is coming into effect this year, and connected product builders that are selling into the EU have 3 years to basically get in line with that. And this regulation, again, lots of stuff in it, but it basically applies to all connected devices that aren't already under some other regulation. So medical device builders in Europe are under the MDR, medical device regulation. But if you're a consumer product company and you're selling connected, smart TVs, and you're selling in the Europe, Cyber Resilience Act will apply to you, right? And so we see lots of stuff going on connected vehicles in Europe. We see this standard called WP29, and it's all around connected vehicles. I don't know, Olivia, if you watched that Netflix show over Christmas. It was called Leave the World Behind. It showed all these Tesla cars being crashed into each other and blocking up the interstate due to a cyber attack. That regulation is exactly why that regulation exists, because of the kind of possible scenarios like that.
That's crazy.
It is crazy. Yeah.
It is.
Yeah.
And that's funny you're mentioning a TV show, because very often people consider the fact that what's in these TV shows and movies is far from reality, but it is not. And that's the thing which is really interesting, I would say. The thing, though, that strikes me, especially with this slide you're showing right now, is navigating all these different regulations in all these different places. Now we're global, right? So business is done across continents. And so it's not like you have a choice. You have to adhere and adopt all of these. I would assume that there's you navigate that for a living. And we'll talk about how DigiCert help customers navigate that as well. But there is a need to help support from someone like you or a company like yours to navigate all of that. And they are ever changing, I guess, as well, right?
They are. They absolutely are. So some of these are coming. Some of them are already enforced. Some are voluntary. Some are mandatory. Like going back to Cyber Trust Mark in the US, that is a voluntary regulation for consumer devices. But if you want that mark on the box of your smart TV, it's mandatory, right? So, and you can see there's other CyberMark programs coming out. You can see one there. Even in Singapore, they're coming out with a labeling scheme for devices. So consumers down the road will be able to educate themselves, go to the store and pick out devices that have a higher level of security vis-a-vis that stamp or that mark. There's questions whether consumers even care. So there's a big open question. There's another, label right next to, the HomeKit label and, the Alexa label. Now there's this other label called Cyber Trust Mark. Would consumers care, even know? So there's still a lot of debate about it. But I think the debate about whether we should do something to secure the fleet of devices across the globe, across verticals, that debate is gone. It's now just, doing it and having regulations kind of enforce that.
Yeah.
The Cyber Resilience Act in the EU, that top one there, that actual one is mandatory, and it has very significant fines in the millions of euros. So if you're caught in breach of that, there are significant fines. It's mandatory. So if you're manufacturing smart TVs out of Japan and you're shipping them to the EU, guess what? That one applies to you.
That's interesting. You were telling me, so regulations are established. How are they enforced? Because like to get a sticker that
Mhm.
says you are compliant, what does that imply for the manufacturers of these devices, both at development, but I would guess as things evolve, you need to update the software on these devices and things like that. So what's the actual impact, you would say?
Yeah, so there's a significant cost to adhering to these regulations. So, for example, going back to Cyber Trust Mark, you'll have to submit it to a lab for certification in order to get that little mark on your device, right? So there's a lot of costs around it. On the consumer side, the problem is the cost, right? So we're talking about 20 or 30 or 50 or $100 devices, and in the consumer IoT ecosystem, most companies still have yet to figure out how to monetize and make money, right? They sell the device once, a $50 device, and they don't have a subscription attach for it, right? So they're not making money in year 2 and 3, yet they've got costs to maintain to these regulations in year and 2 and 3, right? So there's a huge cost question mark around like how will consumer companies continue to make money given this new state of regulatory and this new regulatory environment across the globe.
Yeah, totally. So you discussed already at length the notion of specific regulations for specific verticals, but can you give us a summary? Here we have the geography of them, so we can kind
Yeah.
of locate if we're doing business here and there. But you also have yes, this notion of verticals. So you mentioned some of them already, but can you walk us through that real quick in terms of what are the most notable regulations for each of the verticals that we are interested in here?
Yeah. So if we were to take that previous picture of all these regulations and kind of say, how do they apply on a vertical basis? There's some really interesting things here. So if you were to look back and look through a lot of these regulations, they kind of are rooted in some real baseline standards out there, like ETSI EN 303645 or 27402 from the ISO. So if you're already kind of, if your product security office is already has adopted these practices, you're probably in a pretty good spot in terms of adhering to some of these additional regulatory requirements because they're all typically rooted in some sort of industry standard. And then if you're selling to US government, FIPS is a big thing. So having approved certified crypto on your device to sell into US government is another common kind of baseline standard that device builders will need to adhere to. But on the vertical side, if we look at, for example, automotive or EV charging, we have a couple of requirements that all are around connected cars, right? So the SAE 21434, and like I mentioned, WP29, that's all around securing connected cars and preventing that Tesla situation that we just talked about in that movie on Netflix, right? And then we see also standards around plug-in charge, so EV charging, so both home EV charging and commercial EV chargers that are at the gas stations and elsewhere. So we see standards and security coming in and regulations around that. On the medical side, that has been regulated for years. So
Mhm.
medical device builders are absolutely comfortable generally with the regulated environment that they live within and have the tools and processes and systems to adhere to those. But we've seen updates to your comment earlier of what's changed. The FDA recently in late last fall put together the pre-market submissions, which is a fairly lengthy doc. In the EU, they've got the medical device regulation. And then on the industrial IoT side, there's a number of regulations or standards and, IEC standards. The NIS2 directive, that's another one from EU. So that applies to critical infrastructure devices. Think water, power grid. So if your
Mhm.
IoT device is being sold into and being used in critical infrastructure, now the NIS2 directive applies to you as a connected product builder. And we talked about the EU Cyber Resiliency Act. And then on the consumer side, we've got lots going on as well, right?
Yep. Now that you've discouraged anyone to try and do IoT, let's talk about, like, jokes aside. This is daunting. This is like only because now I need to pay attention if I'm building an IoT device that is maybe kind of generic, established
Yeah.
communications and provides information from some sensors for gas, whatever. Or I don't know, but no, I need to care about all of that. And there are things to help you out there. There are solutions that might already have a level of certification or a warranty from a vendor that they will be compliant with these regulations.
Yes.
There's
Yeah.
also common sense best practices, right? Can you tell us from your perspective, your experience, what are the main things that you need to adopt as practices to make sure that you're not getting into the GDPR like situation, as in after the fact having to, you know, comply with these regulations? So be ready ahead of time. What are the best practices you would recommend people to follow?
Yeah. So if you were to look at, kind of what's common, and if I were a chief product security officer at a connected product company, they're typically the folks that stress over this. This is their job, is to maintain these, make sure their products are compliant, right, and maintain a view of the regulatory and standard landscape. But typically, if you were to look through a lot of these requirements, because they're rooted in some fundamental baseline security standards, there is a lot of commonality to them. And so, things that you'll need to kind of do as a connected product builder is you have to look at your secure software development practices and have something in place. Your developers know how to program defensively, especially in an embedded world, Olivier, right? It's often still C, right? And there's a
Yeah.
lot of there's a lot of chance that you can mess something up when you're coding in C still, right? Versus, .NET. Risk assessments, threat modeling, vulnerability disclosure, strong authentication. On the crypto side, we're seeing a big push for strong crypto. So weak versions of RSA, low key, small key sizes, and then the big thing now on the crypto side is the post quantum risk, or Q-Day as they call it. So making sure that your devices that might be in the supply chain for 2 or 3 years before they're used and not even powered on, Q-Day might be upon us in a few years, right? Where quantum computers can start breaking RSA or elliptical curve crypto. We want to protect devices from that. So NIST has put forward a number of algorithms that are just being finalized, that are quantum safe. And at DigiCert, we're implementing some of those. The first one is dilithium, right? And then there's lots of other things. SBOM's been a big topic too. So if you look through these regulations again, a lot of them are calling out for SBOM. So you have an inventory of the software on the device. Not only are you generating that inventory, you're monitoring it over the lifespan of that device to see if there's new CVEs coming out for any of the libraries that you took a dependency on in that particular device. And if there's a CVE, you do something about it, and then you push a firmware update or do an OTA update. So there's lots going on, but the good news is there is some commonalities across all of these.
Okay.
And actually, there's mutual recognition as well. Like if you go get the Cyber Trust Mark in the US, there's probably going to be a mutual recognition where you'll be compliant with the EU Cyber Resiliency Act. So we're starting to see some of that mutual recognition happening as well.
Yeah, that will be very useful. That was be yeah, definitely. So these are the commonalities. I know DigiCert has been in the security of communications for some time now, right? If you don't know DigiCert and you're a developer, like, that's not normal. But you guys have an approach and solutions specifically for IoT devices. Can you tell me what you would say? Define what are the main aspects of what could be called device trust. You know, how can we trust a device? Oh, you have a slide ready for that. Look at me.
I do. Yeah.
Let's go for
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. So we kind of looked at all these regulations and standards that are
Hmm.
being, that are our customers, our connected product OEMs have to adopt. And we kind of boiled it down to what we call the 6 pillars of device trust. They're pretty simple. First is registration authentication of devices with have some sort of hardware-based identity, like a TPM or a
Hmm.
secure element or a TEE, right? So we have an identity that's rooted to physical hardware, and that prevents counterfeiting and all sorts of other terrible scenarios. And then the use of PKI and certificates. If you go
Yeah.
through a lot of those standards, they all require asymmetric cryptography, X509 certificates, and of course, that needs to be backed by a PKI. And DigiCert's been in that space for years on the public trust side, right? We've been issuing TLS and SMIME and other certificates globally for decades, right?
Yep. There's a keyword here. I would like to bring it up, which is life cycle.
Mhm.
It's not about creating a certificate and the public key, private keys, whatnot, and then uses that forever. These certificates should have a end of life and should be renewed regularly, right? That's super important.
Absolutely, absolutely. So think of your birth certificate. You have one for your lifespan, but then periodically, I mean, you go to the DMV. I think you're in Washington State, right? You have a DMV, and you go and get a driver's license, and you got to periodically renew that. And they check your eyes and a few other things, right? And only then
Yeah.
can you drive. So we have a similar paradigm in IoT where devices are manufactured with birth certificates, but they only get an operational certificate after they've attested to their firmware, they've got the latest updates, everything like that. Then they get an operational cert, which they can use then to talk to other web services, to other IoT devices, right? Using TLS, mutual TLS to secure that communication.
Yep.
Yeah. And then we've also, SBOMs. I mentioned before, SBOMs are very common in these regulations now. And so building a software bill of materials or generating that, which depicts basically what is on the device and then monitoring that, but also monitoring that you don't stick secrets in your source code and do things like that. And
Yep.
then,
And in a world where we use third-party libraries when we create
oh
code,
yeah,
and these days start using copilots and other AI to generate code, you still have to have a review of that code that includes checking for secrets in code. Like that's I would definitely fire my developer doing that. Like it's unfortunately seen too
yeah,
often,
yes,
but that's really bad practice. But
yeah.
you have tools that will monitor your code base and then ensure you're actually compliant in that space, or not
Mhm.
compliant, but actually careful not to have this kind of security gaps in your code.
Absolutely. So most organizations have some sort of scanning process as part of their
Mhm.
software development, using FOSSA, reversing labs. Um, so not only do you want to scan, then you want to digitally sign those software packages and then push them over the air to your devices at scale, right? So you want to make sure that the devices are running secure, signed, scanned, authentic software that they're designed and meant to run. And
Yeah.
then, of course, there's a zero touch provisioning. As I mentioned, I came from Microsoft Azure IoT and where I was part of the device provisioning team. And zero touch is a major thing because it goes back to cost and simplicity. If you're having to touch devices when they're being provisioned at consumers' homes or in the field or hospitals, it adds costs. And the cost we're trying to drive cost out of this equation and
Mhm.
simplify the whole onboarding process.
Yeah.
And then, you need to monitor your devices as well over the lifespan of the device.
Yep. Like permanently have an eye on them. The part about zero touch provisioning ties into the first one, right? Having a unique identity that
Mhm.
the device has in the form of some TPM, some seed in the TPM chip or something like that. is something that definitely helps making that zero touch provisioning experience better. So it's not like everything is independent. Actually, everything is tied together when it comes to these 6 pillars here.
Yeah, absolutely. And they all kind of build upon each other and they really cover that life cycle of the device, right? From
Yep.
birth to decommissioning. And it's important that connected product companies, do these things. And at DigiCert, our value prop is building SDKs and, tools and software on our platform that allow OEMs to do this and really refocus their developers on building a superior connected product with a superior customer experience and really takes those developers and focuses them on that versus them building the security plumbing, right? Building an OTA solution or, buying a third party one and plugging it in and then, cobbling together 10 or 15 SDKs on the device. We really want to take and empower OEMs to focus on building a superior product and really get them out of the security plumbing business, so to speak.
Yeah, yeah. And talking to that, so having this notion of pillars is great. And but we're saying that having the help of someone to provide a solution in the form of a platform or building blocks that you're going to integrate into your IoT solution end to end is definitely paramount, because having the expert helping you do the thing is always good, right? I will not fix my plumbing at home. I refuse to do that. Not that I would not be able to do it with some YouTube videos and some purchase of equipment. I could do that. The risks though that I would take in doing that is such that I'd rather have a professional do it, know what they're doing, do it in a secure, safe way that will not put me in a bad place afterwards if something is messed up, because I don't know what I'm doing when it
Absolutely.
comes to plumbing, right? So
Absolutely.
what is DigiCert offering to help customers go beyond just the understanding of what are the good and best practices? What are you guys doing?
Yeah, so we're really focused on building a developer SDK that does kind of all the tools, all the things that a developer, embedded developer, would need to do on a device. Again, going back to the value prop is refocusing developers on building a superior connected product. So we're focused on that, and then we're focused on building some new software and a platform that really touches upon all these 6 pillars. Today, DigiCert is really known around that second pillar, certificate lifecycle management. But we're actively investing in all 6 pillars. And so we have a new product that's coming out in a few months, and we're going to be excited to share about that. And really, our goal is really to accelerate time to market for our OEMs and that compliance, right? That they maintain a high level of security, driving out cost, accelerating time to market.
Awesome. I like that. We'll put a QR code up there for people to find you. I think you have that on your slides, and we'll bring it up. And well, Kevin, I think this was like more than enlightening. So I hope that people didn't get too much scared and discouraged to go and play around with IoT or implement their IoT solution. I think there's a lot to say about the fact that doing security as a not afterthought but as by design and in depth and part of your habits and culture, I would say, as a team, is key to not face problems later on. And leveraging something like DigiCert offer when it comes to device trust, I think it's key as well, because you guys know what you're doing and you can help people navigate these regulations, and your SDKs will be updated based on the evolution of these regulations. So yeah, that's definitely what I would recommend people to go do. Check it out and learn more about how to secure your devices and how DigiCert can help you. All right.
Thanks, Olivier. It was great chatting with you today.
See you soon. Have a good one. Bye.
Bye bye.